Welcome to the Delight in the Limelight live stream show. Thanks for coming on or watching the replay. I'm your host, Linda Ugalo, speaking confidence coach and author of the book, Delight in the Limelight. I'm here to help you transform your experience of speaking from dread to loving it instead, whether that's on stage, on camera, in the media, or the meeting room. And today we're talking about how to tell better stories to yourself, one that will create more empowering experiences of ease and confidence, wherever it is that you speak up, wherever it is you put yourself out there, and wherever it is that you advocate for yourself. My guest today is Tammy. Oh, please correct me. I forgot to ask. Is it Tammy Heermann?
It is. That's right.
Yay! She's an award-winning leadership expert and author of Reframe Your Story, which is an amazing book. I highly recommend you go out and buy it. With over 20 years of experience, Tammy has helped thousands of people shift their mindsets around leadership and personal growth. Welcome, Tammy.
Thank you. I'm so pleased to be here.
Yes, and I'm really excited because, truthfully, I have found your book rather transformative.
Ah.
I think I'm reading it. It's the right time, the right place, and I can already feel how it's making a difference in my life, particularly in ways that I didn't realize I was holding myself from promoting myself in certain ways. And even though I think I am, I wasn't going as far as I might have. And you showed me how in your book. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for saying that. It's as an author, it's like if I can just, help a couple of people kind of think differently, that's all we're really after.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's funny, Linda, because I read yours as well before joining you here today, and I think so much of what we do is similar. I think we talk about it in different ways sometimes, and maybe in different places, domains. But I'm excited because I think we're helping people fight the same battles.
Yes. Yes, we are. We're helping people fight the same battle. Is that well put? And I think one of the things that, you have found out is I'm into looking at the root causes and clearing them away. But the reason why those root causes are hindering us is because of the stories we tell ourselves from those experiences. And that's where you pick up. You pick up the ways we sabotage ourselves by the stories we're saying. And in your book, you cover 7 different ones. Can you just go through them?
Yeah, absolutely. So really at the highest level, and I'm gonna kind of look quickly to what I call these. First one,
Remember, I know.
I know it's like you write the book and then you forget what words you used. The first one is really about how we think about possibility, and so much of the research here for women about what we think is possible is quite devastating. So just what do we believe in terms of our potential? And then the second is about us getting so mired in the work that we spend so much time in the day-to-day fray that we don't look up and look out to create that kind of longer term vision. The third I call do less shit. I hope I can say that on the show, but is often the favorite chapter by a lot of people because we do so much, and it oftentimes has the opposite effect. That often, if we can do less, oftentimes we can be more because we're paying attention to fewer important priorities. So that one's about being strategic. And then there's one on self-advocacy and really learning to go from bragging and boasting to owning it, flaunting it, and kind of going after what you want. And then there's one on relationships, networking, and dreaded office politics. How are we thinking about that? And for women, it's often we put more stock in our performance versus the relationships. And then the last one, and I think this is where we overlap a lot too, is I call it lighten up brain. It's how do we deal with things like guilt and rumination and those, all of those other voices that often come into our lives and at home and at work.
Yes, as well as I think it was chapter 4 that is all about how we show up in meetings
Mm-hmm.
and whether we feel like it's okay to speak up, if other people have already said what we were going to say. Who are we we may not feel like we're the expert in the room, or and all these things, and so we question and doubt ourselves. And these, as you say, are the stories that we're telling ourselves. Why don't we start there with those stories of not feeling like we're good enough or that we belong, or
or that we are, as you said, expert enough to kind of bring our voice into the room. That,
Right.
Linda, is probably one of the biggest barriers that I work with in women in the workplace. And you'd think, oh, maybe that's when we're younger or newer in our career, but it goes right up to the top executive level. And in fact, I remember years ago reading, one of the first kind of books in this women in leadership space was Confidence Code and Lean In. And I remember it was uh, Angela Merkel and Christine Lagarde, two of the most powerful women in the world at the time, certainly, and they too having these notions of over preparing. How do they bring their voice into these all male spaces that they're in? And so we all feel these things, and not just women, but I think sometimes men often do too. So a lot of that is digging into, okay, you were brought into this job, tell me about your skills, tell me about all your accomplishments, bask in them, and then remember those things. How do you prep for them before those meetings? How do you go into those with a different level of assuredness that you belong there, and that that not only is your value need to be present, it's expected that you speak up in those meetings. People want to hear from you, or they make the assumption that you don't care, you have nothing to say, you can't operate at that level. And of course, that's the exact opposite impression you want to make.
Right, because you kind of leave everything up for interpretation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you I mean, do you find that it really is just a matter of thinking about your value that helps you make the shift?
So,
I'm asking because, as I just mentioned earlier, I often go back to, "Oh, where did you start to feel that way?" And let's clear that up so that you're not getting triggered. But are you able to help people with just kind of tapping into their value?
well, no, I would say that's more of a tool to how do you get out of that. But it's funny, Linda, because when I was writing my book, I hadn't yet encountered your work, and it was such an emotional process because I was revisiting everything from my childhood, and I had a great childhood. There's nothing to complain about, really, in a big scheme of things. But I recall, and so I think this is a really good example of speaking into meetings. So I grew up in a household, Eastern European background, hardworking. My dad was a farmer, my mom was a homemaker, and it was that, dinner time was for eating dinner. And as children, you only spoke when you were spoken to, and it wasn't about, talking about the events of the day. It was to eat, help clean up, and be on your way. And so, with this upbringing, I had a healthy respect for authority, for hierarchy, for hard work, all of those things. But when I entered, the quote unquote boardroom as an executive, again, I'm waiting to be asked to speak. I'm really being deferential to authority and hierarchy. And when you contrast that with my colleague who grew up with parents who were in academia, who her mom was a trailblazer, worked in business, as back in the 50s, 60s, where women just weren't doing that. Their dinner time was a time for debate, and you showed how smart you were. You showed, by respectfully still challenging authority, challenging points of view. And so she would go into the same meetings as me with those beliefs and values. And of course, each of us got into trouble with those behaviors sometimes. Sometimes they were good, they worked, sometimes they didn't. So when I encountered your work about kind of digging back into what's shaped us and what's helped us and what's kind of brought on some fears or hindering us, that was really, really significant for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that they're both really useful tools. And that's what I've come to the conclusion of, that there isn't necessarily one tool that makes the difference, that we need to explore multimodality approach in order to because it's physical, right? And
Yeah,
I'm sure you work with people physically also, like how are people using their voice? How are they
yeah,
using their body? Because we may say something, but if we are kind of sitting back in the chair, if
yeah.
we don't look like we're confident, even if we're saying the words, it's not going to come across that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I have the pleasure of working with a lot of women and underrepresented minorities on their kind of path to being promoted into whether it's a partnership model or executive. And so much of the work we do is around, yeah, how you present. And of course, they're all focused on the words, the PowerPoint slide. In my world, it's not the script or that, and it's like, put that aside. And so that's why I love when you talked about you actually have to practice confidence, like the words, memorize those and then put those aside. That's you now you're just beginning. Now you have to deal with all of this. So yeah, it's fun though. It's fun to see people have that moment of when they believe in themselves. It just looks
Yeah.
different. It looks different. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it does. And it's interesting. I tend to let people lead themselves through their process.
Mhm.
For instance, right now I'm running a comfy on camera class. I have another one starting in a couple of weeks, but in this class people post videos every day, very short ones, and everyone responds with positive reflections. Because
Mhm.
I'm a believer in that, in growing from our strengths.
Mhm.
And at the same time, people get to that place where they're comfortable speaking, but they start to look at their own videos and they go, "Ooh, now I have to deal with me because I'm not getting any negativity from anyone else. All the kind of criticism that I'm cringing from when I watch is from in myself. And so I need to look at how I can handle that with grace and be kinder to myself and also feel like I can move it forward. And it's usually places where we tend to hold ourselves back in the way we express ourselves because when we've been afraid, that impacts our physicality as
Mhm.
well.
Mhm.
It impacts how we show ourselves in the world. And so if we want to come across as, more free or more open, and I speak for myself, it's taken me, I think it'll always be something I'm working on, how to feel more free and self-expressive
Yeah.
and have fun doing it because I've had a lifetime, I've had decades of being inhibited.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And there is a benefit, I believe. What you're having me remember is there is such a benefit, though, to seeing yourself reflected back. And I remember, and actually just today, so I just finished a workshop like 2 hours before we got on together here, and and I was asking them, knowing that I was coming here, what was the most helpful thing for you? It was about mastering your mindset, and one of them said it was in sharing my mantra aloud because once I heard it, it gave her more power. And I remember doing a video, same sort of activity. People were talking about their personal vision and we videotaped them. And halfway through, this woman just changed. Her demeanor changed. Her eyes got brighter. She spoke faster. She smiled. And I was watching her go, oh my gosh, I can't wait to ask her what happened in that moment when there was this big shift. And so when she was finished, I said, what story are you telling yourself that made that shift? And she said, as I heard it, I started to believe it, that I could actually become that person that I was describing. And so, you're talking about a process. There's no one likes to be videotaped. No one likes to share, at first their thinking, but there is so much value in doing that.
Yeah, yeah. And I also think that we can learn how to love it.
Mhm.
I mean, that's my I'm always into like finding the fun. Like how can we learn to love this? And that's what I've set out to help people do. But I remember reading that story in your book. Um, very, very powerful. The idea that as we reflect the things that we appreciate about ourselves, the things we're proud of, the things that we do feel strongly about, suddenly we shift into a place of enthusiasm.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because then you'll know that I also told another story where it didn't work out quite the same way. And in the middle, this other woman just started crying, and so we stopped the camera, and I said, "Okay, what story are you telling yourself in this moment?" And she said, I don't know what I'm doing here as I look around the room. And she was doing toxic comparisons to what am I even doing here? I don't deserve to be here. And so to your point, we had to delve into like, forget about teaching her how to, you know, create her network or her brand statement or whatever. It's like she first felt that she deserved it. And so we were with her, we were starting at a very different place. And so I know today we wanted to talk a little bit about how often training and development falls short. Well, I think that's a very good example. We just put people through these classes, and we don't often have experts like yourself or myself really delving into that story, because until we get there, the rest of it won't sink in. It'll be a waste of time.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, because it's kind of like gathering more filters, or the craft, but until you have it on the inside, you can't really utilize the craft, or you can't absorb the craft. Well, I don't know if that's true. There are some people who are great speakers. They get out there, nobody would ever know that they're terrified, but inside they may be having a panic attack, and I know because they come to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, well, so do we martyr ourselves for the benefit of other people, or are we able to? And not everybody has that same ability to quote unquote perform. Some people, if they're feeling their emotion, it just
Takes over. Yeah.
it takes over,
Yeah.
and other
Yeah.
people are able to compartmentalize better. But yes, so do you find that a lot of company trainings kind of ignore these, like what would normally happen, like if it wasn't you leading that training?
Oh, I think most of them do. And so I sometimes I pick an example. So I'll pick the example of, learning how to network better, build stakeholder maps and manage stakeholders, all that kind of good stuff. And so oftentimes we just go in and here's the tools, here's the PowerPoint slides, here's the content. We run a few conversations and we say, okay, now go out and try this, create your elevator speech, go out and, set up a meeting with someone, ask them, and then go out and have a coffee or a virtual Zoom chat, and you expand your network. And all the while, so many people are sitting there going, I could never do that. I have no value to offer my network. I don't think what I do is particularly special at all. So I don't know, how to talk about that or why anyone would want to listen to me. I could never go ask that person. They're too senior. They're too experienced. I'd never ask them for a coffee. And so all these things are going around in their heads. In the meanwhile, we're like, oh, just go try these tools. And so any development that I engage in, it's always first around, okay, what are you telling yourself about this particular topic? And let's kind of talk about that first, because otherwise they're not going to do it. They're not going to do any of that stuff that we're hoping they do as a result of those PowerPoints and tools.
Right. That's great. So you always start with the story.
Yeah. Yeah. The story and the mindset.
Mhm.
And you feel it. You run workshops or in your coaching, when people are there because they're either told to be there or when they don't want to be there or whatever it may be. It makes a big difference to kind of get past those blocks first, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So how would you, let's say, with going back to that story that you told about this woman who broke down in tears as she was being video cameraed, how did you handle that?
Yeah, so there's only so much you can do in a group setting, right? Because this could become quite a private conversation. Luckily, that program also had coaching attached, so there's a few things they could do. First of all, which is so wonderful about women's programs, when you get a group of women together in a room. I mean, the group just scooped her up and said, what are you talking about? Like, you are a brilliant scientist. So the power of the support she felt in that room was the first thing. And then we kind of talked about it a little bit, and then my whole mission is to normalize this. anyone else feeling this way? And they're like, oh my God, me too. And like, I don't even know if I want a promotion. And like, what does my boss told me to be here? And so it opened up this whole new level of connection and vulnerability. So we kind of worked with that a little bit. And then, and then of course ask, check in on her after and ask her permission if she would like to talk to her coach about it and all these good things. So I guess my takeaway is in the large group, you kind of have to assess, how much can we, A, lift this person up, B, normalize what the person is feeling, because I'm sure other people are feeling it too, and kind of work to use that as a real connection for the group rather than a derailer.
So people have their story. They may be able to say their story. I don't belong here. Everybody else is an expert. All the things that you mentioned. Then what do you do to reframe it?
Yeah. So, oh my gosh, there's so many tips, and that's why I was taking notes today, right? But so what I asked the group about was because I thought, what were the ones the tips that they were kind of using the most, and a lot of what I talk about is. Or what they reflected back was in the moment, kind of recognizing when those voices come. And the most useful tip for them in the last few weeks that they've been practicing is kind of talking and befriending that voice. And you talk about that in your book as well. Is how do we acknowledge it? Thank it for trying to protect us, thank it for watching out for us, and then take those triggers and tripwires and implement something to kind of turn the story around. So for some it was a mantra, a short phrase. For others, it was they then kind of in the moment reflected on, okay, no, you do know what you're talking about. You do have X amount of experience. You are here for a reason. So kind of counteracting the negative thoughts. So that was kind of, I'd say, what came back is the most. So recognizing it, detaching from it, naming it, thanking it, and then having a way to kind of in the moment counteract it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's sort of, I think I remember you talking about like, what is it that you would want your story to sound like?
Mhm. Yeah, well, that can be a powerful one, and talking about visualization too. So again, today, this one woman brought up that she was picturing a water pitcher because her story was that she was never doing enough at work and at home, never doing enough. And so for her, she was visualizing this water pitcher and saying, okay, if I keep emptying it and there's nothing left for me, if it's empty, if I'm holding it and there's nothing left for me because I've given it all to everyone, she's dry, she's thirsty, and so for her, that was a really cool way to visualize and to bring that mindfulness there, to always keep it full, to always keep it full. So I thought that was kind of a powerful technique as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, visualization is something, well, gosh, all the top athletes use it, all the Olympians use it, performers use it, business people can use it too. And I think it's really important for us to not, as you say, alongside the unhelpful stories that we may be telling ourselves, to question, well, what is it that I would really like to feel?
Yeah.
And to allow yourself to go into the imagination of that and the visualization of it, and to actually see yourself doing those things. I find visualization really powerful for speaking confidence if you're going into a meeting or you
Mhm.
have to do a presentation, to ahead of time for anytime you feel nervous, to let that be a reminder to go into a visualization of, well, how do I want to feel? And what does that even look like if I was to imagine that? Because it's through the imagination that we begin to see the possibility of us
Exactly.
being a certain way.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what we did in our part one of our workshop. Is I had them kind of draw the before. How does this make you? How do these self-limiting beliefs make you feel? And then we did, okay, what are the reframes? And then, you know, how would you like to feel? And so to just, Stickman didn't have to be great drawings, and just being able for them to visualize that shift too, I think is an important tool.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, and also it's um, showing us that we have a choice.
Yeah, yes, and then we can feel control.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah,
Very
absolutely.
nice.
Yeah.
So, like, how can leaders coach for confidence? Like, you know, we're not working in all these companies that we may be giving workshops at. How do you recommend? Do you train leaders? Do you have ideas for them?
Yeah, absolutely, I do. And in, before I kind of focused exclusively on the advancement of women for many years, that's what I was doing: coaching workshops, coaching programs, all kinds of leadership workshops. And what I would say is, so it's hard to get managers to coach at all. I'm sure you've found that too, right? Like it's a rare who really kind of envelop their talent and have true and meaningful kind of coaching conversations and give feedback and all of that good stuff. But when they do, they mostly focus on competence. What are the skill sets? What is the feedback about that project or whatever? And studies have even shown that men and women typically get different kinds of feedback. For men, it's more business based and project and outcome based, which is of course what's needed for advancement. And for women, it's more about style and impact and that kind of thing. So first, I would say leaders just even pick even just what you're doing now. Are you giving helpful feedback that grows and advances all your people, or is there some bias there? So that'd be the first piece. And then second, I think especially in this new defined world of work and everything we're learning about diversity and inclusion and all of the data, is it's not enough to just coach for competence. We need to coach for confidence. And even, and I know you defined confidence in your book too, and I liked that definition, is even we have bias around what we think confidence looks like. And I think I've seen old study. It's tall, it's white, it's male, and it's named John. For there's more John CEOs than there are female in total CEOs. And so we even think we know what confidence looks like, and we have to even recast that. So actually had an example with my husband. And of course, over the years, as we got to work at home, I got to overhear a lot of his his conversations. And he was recruiting for a new role, and a woman had applied, and he really wanted that woman for the role. He thought she'd be amazing, but at the last moment, she kind of pulled out and she said, "No, I don't want. I decided not to go for that role." And he's like, "But I really wanted her." And I said, "Okay, have you had the conversation to find out why she's pulling out? And are you using this opportunity to reinforce your belief in her around this role and beyond?" Because for so many women, we don't put ourselves out there. In fact, I shared in the book devastating studies around. Well, my favorite was when all of the current and former female CEOs of Fortune 1000 and other large organizations were interviewed. So it wasn't a huge sample size, but it was all of them. Only 65% of them said they'd always wanted to be CEO. Sorry, only 9% said that. 65% said that they'd only done it when someone else told them you had that in you. Right? 65% had to be told, go for it. You have it in you. You can do it. Whereas only 9% were like, yeah, I'm going after it. And so this notion of it's not always the person banging on your door or on your, setting up calendar chats with you. It's not always that person that A is the best option that deserves it. And that's not always what confidence and initiative looks like. And so we need to be able to spot in our coaching conversations around, well, what makes you think you're not ready for that role? What would it take for you to feel comfortable in taking that risk or that new project or attending that client meeting or whatever it may be? Like, we have to get after the confidence piece, as well as when you show up to that meeting, do this, and that.
Yeah, yeah. That's great. I love the inquiry aspect. And I'm also very much devoted to the idea of giving specific positive reflections of when
Mhm.
we see things in people that we want to highlight and we want them to know that we see. I haven't posted this yet, but I had a conversation with Howard Glasser,
Mm.
who wrote I think he became famous for transforming the difficult child, but he
Mm.
has developed something called the uh, nurtured heart approach, or the inner wealth initiative. And his whole, I mean, he's turned whole school districts around where, kids who were, um, 8 times the amount of suspensions in the school as other schools around have gone down to 0, and 50% attrition rate of teachers have gone down to 0, all from letting kids know what people like and appreciate about them, and often. And that we often, I mean, we spend so much more eloquent time in describing the things that aren't working, and we give very little excitement and energy, not just acknowledgement, but energy to the things that we're very appreciative of and that we see in other people as their essence. And if we could, I think if we could get companies to do more of that, I think that we'd have a lot less of this issue happening.
I completely agree. And Linda, I've heard it. I've heard senior executives say, we pay them X amount of money to do this. I don't need to tell them what they're doing. Like, just do your job. That whole notion of just, this is what I expect is kind of like that old dad approach. Is no, we are humans. I don't care what position we're, we need to hear what you think we're doing well, what you appreciate in us. That will go far,
Yeah.
far.
Yeah. Howard Glasser says that when you lead children to see the greatness in them, they act out greatness.
Right. Oh, I got to keep that in mind for my own parenting. Because of course we're all well-intentioned. We're like, well, I want to put high expectations because then they'll meet those high expectations. And it's like, no, they'll meet them when
I know. I highly recommend his books for parenting. I think they're great. So I know that we have a couple of people live. If you have any questions, please, before we hop off, just put them in the chat. We'd be happy to talk about it. If there's something that we haven't covered in terms of mindset and turning the stories we tell ourselves around, I'd like to just kind of like reiterate the process, because I feel like we talked about some specifics, but there's this general way that I really appreciated in your book about the idea that if something feels like we're discouraged or frustrated, this is how I've used it. If I'm discouraged or frustrated in some way in my work life, what is that? I can ask, what is the story I'm telling myself? And what is the story that I want to hear instead?
I think that's a really lovely way of kind of bringing it all together. Yeah, I think that's an important check. I think that's something we can ask. And you had one similar, that the best friend test, right? I've started using that now. And so I think, I think we've given each other some really good tools.
Yeah, the best friend test may have heard it before. Would you say it to a best friend? If you wouldn't, then you don't have a reason to say it to yourself, because studies show that when we demoralize ourselves, we're less likely to achieve our goals. So I think the takeaway here is that we want to be the most encouraging, the most supportive, the most compassionate, and understanding that we can be for ourselves, because no one else is going to be able to do that for us. Everyone else has their own responsibilities and lives and jobs, but we can do it for ourselves. Yeah. Is there anything that you would like to leave us with before we end this?
Well, I was just reflecting again, having just fresh come out of this workshop, and it's interesting because what a lot of what you deal with is kind of those big conversations, whether it's a speaker on stage or those bigger moments, is at least what comes across in the book. And some people feel that fear every single time they go into a meeting. Like, it could be 6 times a day on Zoom or in person, depending. And one of the really great tips that was reiterated today by one of my participants was just in how they prepare. We prepared a bit with our intentions today too, is preparing even a minute before the meeting. This is how I want to feel. This is how I want to come across. And these are the couple things I want to talk about to get my voice out. So it could be 5, just little bullet points, and no one even has to see them. Even if you are in person, it can just be in your book there. And that is so critical, that you can just kind of look down and go, right, my voice matters. My voice matters. I'm going to talk about this. And so that notion of preparation and being really intentional, I think is a really good tip for anyone who's feeling that kind of pressure many times a day.
Yeah. Yeah. And as maybe to tie in what we talked about with voice and body, that if you can warm up your voice in the morning a little bit before you go to your workplace, or if you're, presenting on or talking on Zoom, then you can do it anytime. You can do it right before you get into
Yeah.
your meeting. But to open up your voice and just kind of like take up the space in the room with your voice and move your body around so that you feel like you are more open
Mhm.
and release the tension. You can take up space with your body and embody that sense of largesse.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Is that a real word? Can I use that word? Largesse?
I think it is. I think
You
it
say
is.
something
I
else
don't know
to
where I pulled it from, but I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah, and you can do it right now. I mean, we can all do it. Whoever is here in this moment or watching later, just feel yourself, like look around your space and feel your energy take up the whole room. And and then as you can if you speak, I'm a big believer in speaking out loud to
Mhm.
ourselves because it's a way to practice.
Yeah.
And we can also like enjoy the sound of our voice and enjoy the resonance and just feeling like we are filling the space with our voice as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I agree. This is great.
Well, fun. Thank you so much. I adore your book, Reframe Your Story. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch and learn more about your training?
Absolutely. Training keynotes, so tammyheermann.com. I see my big name tag there. Fairly easy to spell. And yeah, and book is available Amazon or any major retailers. So thank you.
Great. Great. You are a wonderful reader of your book. I highly
Oh,
recommend the
thank you.
audiobook for everyone.
Oh, thank
And
you.
entertaining, so entertaining.
Did you do that with your book? Because it's a humbling process. The audio recording.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love I love that. I wanted to do it again as soon as I
Oh,
was finished.
jeez. Okay, we'll agree to disagree there.
We'll talk. Okay, thank you everyone who came on today. I appreciate your interest in becoming more confident, more at ease, more fully yourself when you speak. And next week, I have with me Heather Hansen, who is author of the book Advocate to Win. So we'll be talking more about how to advocate for yourself. Be sure to come in. That'll be next Wednesday. I can't remember the time, but you'll hear about it. And until that time, wishing you speaking confidence and delight in the limelight.